podcast. Your host, Dr. Kelly Ray, is a renowned mindset coach and counselor, often referred to as the inner critic tamer. With a passion for guiding individuals through life's challenges, she specializes in personal growth and emotional healing. In each episode, Dr. Kelly Ray shares invaluable insights, practical strategies, and relatable stories designed to inspire you to take that first step toward positive change. So, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready to dive deep into meaningful conversations that empower you on your journey. Let's welcome Dr. Kelly Ray.
Hey there. Welcome back to another episode of Getting to the Week. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Ray, and as always, I'm so glad that you're here to spend some time with me today. So here's your question for today, for this episode. Have you ever spent years wanting something, praying for it, working toward it, healing for it, preparing for it, only to feel unexpectedly emotional when it finally started happening? Not because you didn't want it, not because it was wrong, not because you changed your mind, but because suddenly the thing you'd been imagining became real. I think we talk a lot about how painful it is when life doesn't go according to plan, but we don't talk nearly enough about how unsettling it can feel when life actually starts moving in the direction you've been hoping for. Because sometimes the dream arriving can be just as emotionally disruptive as the dream being denied. And if you've ever found yourself excited, grateful, terrified, hopeful, emotional, and completely confused all at the same time, this conversation is for you. So wherever you are in the world today, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get this conversation started. A couple of years ago, I made a vision board. Not revolutionary, just a collection of things I hoped to experience. Travel, health, new connections, adventure, growth. The kind of thing many of us put on our vision board every year. And honestly, at the time, they felt more like possibilities than plans. Interesting ideas, future goals, things I'd like to experience someday. Something funny happened. Life started responding. Not all at once, not overnight, but little by little. I completed a half marathon. I continued improving my health. I started having conversations that eventually turned into meaningful connections. I began exploring new interests. I started writing a book. I booked a trip that would have felt completely impossible to an earlier version of myself. And somewhere along the way, I noticed something unexpected. Part of me was thrilled, and part of me was quietly freaking out. Because wanting something and receiving something are two different experiences. When it's a dream, it's safe. When it's real, it asks something of you. I think one of the reasons people feel confused during seasons of growth is because nobody talks about this stage. We hear a lot about setting goals, manifesting, creating vision boards, taking action, stepping into your new chapter. But we don't hear much about what happens when those things start working. Because that's often when fear gets louder, not quieter. Suddenly there's something to lose, something to protect, something to care about, something real. And our nervous system doesn't always know the difference between danger and expansion. It simply recognizes change. And change often gets flagged as a potential threat until we have enough experience to prove otherwise. Professionally, I've seen this happen countless times. A client finally sets a boundary and then feels guilty. A client starts trusting themselves and then suddenly feels anxious. A client gets the opportunity they've been working toward and then immediately begins questioning everything. Not because they're failing, because they're growing. And growth often feels unfamiliar. Those of you who have been listening know I've been talking about a part of myself named Trudy. And for new listeners, Trudy is what I call my inner critic, protector, and head of emergency preparedness. Her entire job has been keeping everyone safe. So naturally, when life starts changing in exciting ways, Trudy has questions. Lots of questions. For example, when I booked my trip to Turkey, I was excited. Trudy immediately requested a risk assessment, travel insurance, emergency contacts, backup plans for the backup plans. And honestly, I think that's how many of us operate. Part of us says, this is amazing. And the other part says, oof, let's not get carried away here. Recently, I imagined asking Trudy how she felt about all of these things finally happening. Her response? I supported the dream. I said, you did? She replied, of course. Then what's the problem? The implementation phase was not properly disclosed. Oh my God, that was hard. And honestly, I think many of us can relate, right? It's one thing to know things. It's another thing to actually put the action into making it happen. And if you've not done something before, then you're all, get discombobulated and stumble on your words like I did. Dreams are comfortable when they're hypothetical. They're much more vulnerable when they become reality. One thing I've learned over the years is that not all discomfort means stop. Sometimes discomfort means growth. Sometimes discomfort means change. Sometimes discomfort means standing in territory you've never stood before. I think we often assume fear automatically means something's wrong. Sometimes fear simply means something is new. And that's an important distinction. Because if we're not careful, we'll interpret every nervous feeling as a warning sign, instead of recognizing it as evidence that we're stretching beyond what we've known. That doesn't mean we ignore red flags. It doesn't mean we abandon common sense. It simply means we stop assuming every uncomfortable feeling is proof we're headed in the wrong direction. Sometimes it's actually proof we're headed somewhere different. And one thing nobody tells you about growth is that expansion has symptoms. And unfortunately, they often look suspiciously like problems. You may start doubting yourself, overthinking, questioning decisions you've already made, feeling emotional, feeling restless, wanting to pull back, wanting to hide, wanting to sabotage the very thing you've been asking for. And because those experiences feel uncomfortable, many people assume they're receiving a warning. Sometimes they're simply experiencing expansion, because expansion stretches capacity, and stretching capacity is uncomfortable. In fact, sometimes expansion feels so uncomfortable that we mistake it for a problem that needs to be solved. We start searching for what's wrong. We start second guessing ourselves. We start looking for evidence that we're making a mistake. Not because we are, because our system is trying to make sense of territory it has never traveled before. And that's where things start getting really interesting. One thing I've learned to understand is that Trudy has her own language. The problem isn't that she talks. The problem is that for years I assumed everything she said was a prediction. Now I'm realizing most of it is information. For example, Trudy says, what if this doesn't work? And the translation to that is, we've never been here before. Trudy says, maybe we're moving too fast. Translation is, I haven't gathered enough evidence yet. Trudy says, maybe we should wait. Translation, I don't have certainty yet. Trudy says, what if this falls apart? Translation is, I care about this. Trudy says, this feels wrong. Translation, this feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar is not the same thing as dangerous. I think that's an important distinction. Because if you don't understand the language, you'll mistake protection for prophecy. You'll assume every anxious thought is a warning. Every uncomfortable feeling is a sign. Every moment of uncertainty means you're making a mistake. But often your inner critic isn't predicting the future. It's reacting to the fact that you're standing somewhere you've never stood before. And honestly, that changes everything. Because once you understand the translation, you stop fighting yourself. You stop treating every fearful thought like an emergency. You stop assuming your nervous system is giving you directions. Instead, you can acknowledge what it's trying to do. Protect you. Care for you. Keep you safe. And then decide for yourself whether safety is what's needed in the moment, or whether it's time to keep moving forward anyway. Now, let's talk about something else that happens during expansion. Because it isn't just your thoughts that get involved. Your nervous system joins the conversation too. And this is where things can become really confusing. Because sometimes you can logically know something is good for you and still feel anxious about it. You can know you're making a healthy decision and still feel unsettled. You can know you're moving towards something you've wanted for years and still find yourself holding your breath. I think many people assume that if they feel nervous, scared, or emotional, it must mean something is wrong. Sometimes your nervous system is simply responding to the fact that you're entering unfamiliar territory. Not dangerous territory, unfamiliar territory. And those are not always the same thing. What often shows up during expansion? Holding your breath without realizing it. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Scanning for problems. Preparing for disappointment. Looking for reasons something won't work. Feeling excited and scared at the exact same time. And if you've ever experienced that, you're not broken, you're human. Because your nervous system is trying to reconcile two realities at one time. One part of you is saying, this is what we've wanted. Another part is saying, yes, but what happens if we lose it? That's why people sometimes pull away from opportunities they prayed for. That's why people sabotage relationships they desperately wanted. That's why people talk themselves out of dreams they worked years to create. Not because they don't want them, because vulnerability has entered the room. The moment something becomes real, it becomes possible to lose. And that awareness can activate every protective part of us, including Trudy, especially Trudy. So if you've noticed yourself overthinking lately, if you noticed yourself feeling emotional for no obvious reason, if you've noticed yourself waiting for something to go wrong even though things are actually going right, take a breath. You may not be receiving a warning. You may be adjusting to expansion. You may be learning how to hold more joy, more possibility, more uncertainty, more life. And that's a skill most of us were never taught. But it's a skill we can learn. One thing I've learned over time is that receiving requires a different set of skills than surviving. Most of us know how to survive. We know how to work, how to push, how to prepare, how to anticipate problems, how to keep moving even when things are difficult. But receiving is different. Receiving asks us to stay present, to remain open, to enjoy something while it's happening instead of immediately preparing for it to end. And honestly, I think that's one of the hardest parts of expansion. Not creating opportunity, not doing the work, not building the dream, allowing ourselves to experience it. Because somewhere along the way, many of us learn that disappointment hurts. Loss hurts. Heartbreak hurts. Failure hurts. So our nervous system develops a strategy. Don't get too excited. Don't get your hopes up. Stay realistic. Stay guarded. Stay prepared. Just in case. The problem is that those same protective strategies can prevent us from fully experiencing the very things we've been asking for. The relationship, the opportunity, the adventure, the success, the healing, the next chapter. We spend so much time preparing for loss that we forget to participate in what's actually happening. And maybe that's part of the lesson. Maybe expansion isn't only about creating something new. Maybe it's about increasing our capacity to receive it, to enjoy it, to trust ourselves inside it, to stay present with it without constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because eventually there comes a moment when the question is no longer, can I create this life? The question becomes, can I allow myself to experience it? So today, I want to leave you with a question. What if the emotions you're feeling right now aren't signs that something is wrong? What if they're signs that something is becoming real? The relationship, the opportunity, the healing, the confidence, business, the adventure, the next chapter. What if part of the discomfort you're feeling isn't fear of failure? What if it's the vulnerability of finally having something you've wanted for a very long time? Because maybe the dream isn't arriving to test you. Maybe it's arriving to meet you. And maybe one of the bravest things we can do is stop asking, what if this goes wrong? Long enough to ask, what if this goes right? What if the anxiety isn't always a warning? What if sometimes it's expansion? What if the nervous system isn't saying, turn around? What if it's saying, we've never been here before? Maybe you don't need to become fearless before you move forward. Maybe you simply need to understand what fear is trying to say. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Getting Through the Week. And before I let you go, a quick thank you. Several listeners have asked how they can support the podcast. So I've added a listener support link in the show notes. The podcast will always remain free. But if these conversations have helped you and you'd like to support the show, you're welcome to do so. And whether you support financially, share an episode, leave a review, or simply continue showing up each week, thank you. It truly means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. And remember, the dream becoming real can feel scary. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Sometimes it simply means your life is expanding. Until next week, please know I send you so much love.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Getting Through the Week podcast with Dr. Kelly Ray. If you're looking to connect with her or schedule an appointment, here's how you can reach her. Follow her on Instagram at AskDrKellyRay. Check out her Facebook page at Dr. Kelly B. Find her on TikTok at Dr. Kelly. Visit her website at drkellyray.com. Or send her an email at drkellyray@gmail.com. Until next week, Dr. Kelly Ray sends you so much love.